Welcome back. My name's Adrian.
My name's Aaron.
And this is 2teachone.
2teachone.
This is part 2 of the grief and loss episode with Allison. Again, we definitely want to thank her for, coming to speak to us about this. It's something we all encounter and experience. And so, why not have a discussion, so we can try and help some people out there.
Yeah, to let everybody know that they are a part of our SAD club.
Absolutely. The SAD Club. You're going to hear a lot more about that. If you didn't get a chance to listen to part 1, please make your way to our website. That's www.2teachone.com. That's www.2teach1.com. Or you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at TWOTEACHONE.
2teachone.
See.
All right, so here goes the beginning of part 2.
Enjoy.
Do you think it's helpful, like, for instance, imagine yourselves in another line of work. Do you think that being in this position where we are forced to set our own, because it doesn't matter what mood you're in, right? If somebody needs to talk and they need to vent, you have to be there for them because it's so important. Do you think if you did something else and weren't able to, like, set it aside, do you think that would have been easier? Do you think it would have been easier to be like a tax attorney and going through grief? Or do you think it's more beneficial, we're dealing with people who are also going through some pretty heavy things?
Oh, I want to know what Allison has to say about this.
I am still processing. What a beautiful question, because there were several days where I was like, man, I just wish I worked at Starbucks and could just be without having to be for someone else. And I think that regardless of what we do, we still have to just get through it.
Okay, yeah.
So the space and time that it'll take for you to recover. So maybe in the beginning I could only hold space for 10 minutes without, taking a mind break, right? And then eventually I got to 15 and eventually I got to 30 and eventually I got to, back to like wherever I feel like my brain could do it. I think that there's benefits to both, obviously, but I also think that the major benefit is like to be in the space that I'm at in terms of my tribe, my club, right? All gets it. So that's what I think is the most beneficial in terms of being able to be in a field where everyone understands the value of mental health. Right. Everyone understands that therapy and good therapy is valuable. Everybody understands that, like, it's okay to take space and hold it too. Yeah. So for me, which doesn't really answer your question, but I think it's all connected.
No, I get it.
Yeah. That's what I value, is that I'm in a community, I'm in a tribe that genuinely gets it.
Yeah, that's a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, we're in an environment where healing is, what we're doing.
Yes.
On whichever end of it you're on, right? And, they talk about how it's a give and take, right? Because in any given day, these people that we care for teach me a lot about myself or something. Unfortunately, sometimes they go through something, and from the outside looking in, I identify that and I'm like, wow, it's unfortunate that you're going through that thing, but here I am benefiting from, seeing what's, going on, right? And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a good answer, and that's a great question.
Yeah, because it's also interesting because we live and work in a field where we know people who have passed away, and I think it's a sort of grief because the client that we were speaking about earlier.
Yeah. It's absolutely grief.
It's definitely grief, but it's so impersonal. But my mind wants to tell me it's personal. And so I find when dealing with that I've had to remind myself over and over again, because I'll start to think about it, like when the mail comes and you realize that the world is going on. They don't realize that he has passed away.
Right.
And I'll start thinking, what could I have done differently? Because this wasn't necessarily something that couldn't have been avoided, right? So what could I have done differently? And I realize I just have to remind myself that it's a professional thing and that much like a doctor has to just move on, that you have to realize did not cause this. In
Well-
fact, I did everything I could to avoid it.
Well, and I would even challenge that we do that with anybody, right? So I think anybody that's in or, contiguous in terms of the blowback of a loss, we all do that still. The like,
sure.
what could I have done
Oh,
different?
man.
Could I have seen this?
Yeah,
And I
good
think a
point.
lot of that anger comes from that too. And it's that like self-reflection of like what all of the shoulds,
Yes.
the what
Right.
ifs, all of those things that we can beat ourselves up over. So whether it's somebody that is a little bit more distant, like that's why it's all grief. It's absolutely grief.
No, you're right. You're right.
It's layered.
It's
and
just
it's
a
complex.
spectrum, yeah.
Yes, it's a spectrum. Absolutely.
Yeah, it took me a long time to realize that the small little things that happened around the time of my mom's passing, that did not affect, like, nothing that could have been done, right?
Right.
And then you get to that point eventually where you're like, I guess that's the way, because at the time it seems trite and you don't want to hear a platitude. Everything happens for a reason. But in time, like you said, you get to that point where you're like, okay, I don't run the show. Let's hope whoever does knows what they're doing and that everything does happen for a reason. You just sort of place that trust, and especially being in recovery, you have to place trust in some kind of higher power.
Well, and even in the 5 stages of grief, one of the things you just said, right, is like shifting a little bit into acceptance, but that it isn't linear. A lot of times we think there's these 5 stages and we have to like go through anger and then we move on to the next one, right?
Right.
Whereas no, right? We actually will move in and out, in and out, in and out. We can move to acceptance one day and then go all the way back to like denial. That it is a spectrum. There's no right answer. It's not linear. It's not a line, right?
Yeah.
It's just messy and complicated, and all of that is okay. It's
Yeah.
okay to
Yeah.
shift in and out, right? Like,
It's very human.
yes.
Yes.
So I have a question, because it just came up recently. There's a new member to, the SAD Club. I had a discussion with him, and he's, a mutual friend. He's my best friend. You know where I'm talking about, right? So I was talking to my best friend, and he talks about how, and it's very, very much tied into what you were just saying. Someone that we used to work with that were close to died a little while ago. And so there's been this process, and as more information was coming out, he was putting together this timeline of how things actually transpired, right? And those questions, what if I had done this? What if, and all that kind of stuff, right? And one that I was surprised to hear, from someone that I absolutely, and it's almost like judgy that I'll even say this, but I'm just going to say it because it came up in my mind. One of the things that surprised me was, and I've been here before, is that, he said, why him? He had that why him and not, me, like
Survivor's guilt.
yeah, exactly. And so what is that about? Because I in the past, I associated that because I've been there before.
Sure.
But I was super sick the last time I thought that, right? But this is someone that, I believe to be, very well and aware and, is capable of, self-searching and, really maintaining themselves, right? So, what is it? I guess it doesn't matter, sick or not, we are, susceptible to having this, this feeling of the survivor's guilt.
I think it's significant for that person to name that, because that shows a lot of vulnerability around really looking at what's the difference between me and that person.
Right.
And I 100% have experienced that same thought, because me and my brother were built from the same, foundation, if you will.
Yeah.
And so why him and not me?
Right.
He was experiencing a sickness, and yeah, I think that that's a normal response. And I really don't think logic plays a huge part in this grief dance, if you will, because we're really just searching, right? I think our brains really want to be able to say that.
Right.
That's it.
Right.
This is it. This is the
To
reason.
latch onto something.
And that's back to the beginning of our conversation, which is this like the brain and the emotional. Like we really want our brains to be able to have something to hold on to and to categorize and say, this is the why. that we usually don't get, right? And that can sometimes help us process through things, and it can also really stunt the emotional processing, which I think is really helpful too.
And I think too, we are sort of dancing around the main philosophical question, right? Which is, at a certain point in grief, we reflect back on ourselves and we realize our own mortality. And, some very famous and deep thinking philosophers have said that that is the most fundamental and, for lack of a better word, truly terrifying aspect when dealing with the world is our own mortality. And when we see another going through it and we realize that someday, right, everyone is going to experience the same thing. And we think of ourselves as forever. And although I personally believe that that does exist, at least in this form, someday I am going to pass away as well. And reflecting on that and facing it is maybe the biggest existential, maybe the biggest thing that a mind can comprehend in and of itself. So even someone who is extremely well rounded emotionally and knows themselves very well will still have that moment of, facing their own mortality.
Right.
And I think that's also a huge aspect that I had to come to terms with. Well, as much as you can come to terms with that.
Right.
Which may not be at all completely.
Well, and I think going back even to survivor's guilt, the same idea. So when you're looking at your own mortality and you, for whatever reason, made it.
Yes.
Right? You survived and the other person didn't. This weird sense of guilt. And I think guilt and shame show up a lot in grief and loss of like, why not me? Why them? And then even going from like, why not me? And then them, and then feeling grateful that it's not you.
Right.
And then the weird guilt that comes from feeling grateful
Right.
that it's not you.
Yeah.
And then it's this huge vacillation, I would say, that consistently happens between this guilt and shame throughout, because you'll have an experience as simple as like laughing and smiling about something. And I remember being guilty about laughing about something, and this person didn't get to do this with me. They don't get to do this with me anymore. Yeah. And then the guilt of that, right? Yeah. And then, oh, well, why do I feel guilty about that? I should be enjoying life. They would want me to live. Right. Yeah. Right. And then that platitude pops in your head. And it's just the eye roll, Aaron. I appreciate that. Like that, it's just this weird dance that we're just in, right? Yeah. Where you're just like, this is a fucking hamster wheel. Like, how do I get out of here? Yeah. Right. And then you realize, I don't know, for me, it's just like, and then I just realized that I was just living. Like, I was just experiencing things. And that's when that's when I was realizing, oh, okay, like, you can do this. Yes. There's like moments of like, oh, I laughed and I didn't like feel guilty about it, or I had a really fun experience and I didn't, I didn't cry today. That was like a monumental one for me after like, a month straight of every single day being like, girl, you didn't cry today. Like, good for you. And just like those milestones are so significant, I think, to point out like it's okay to feel okay. Yeah. Yeah. And eventually that reflection on it lessens, and then one day you realize it's like, oh, I thought about her and I wasn't sad. Like the memory was enjoyable. I enjoyed running through the memory, and it wasn't followed by that, oh, and I'll never have that again sense. Right. It was like, no, that was a lot of fun, and I'm always going to really like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And in a way, it's almost, any relationship that ends, whether it's from death or like a romantic relationship or anything, where you can get to that point where you remember like, oh, that was cool. And you don't have that self-reflection. But I do love that the techniques, especially, psychology and therapy, has come such a long way from let's just sit on a couch and talk for years. The challenging of our own ideas, right? The realization, especially when you've learned it, that, oh, okay, so I'm thinking this, and now I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about, and I can challenge that. Mm-hmm. And I can
well, and not just challenging in the sense of, I don't want to think that way, so I got to shove it down deep.
Sure.
But like, it's okay that I'm sad, and I'm going to be sad. And now for me, it's
Yeah.
funny. I'm like, I'm probably going to be sad the rest of the day, but I know if I just make it to some sleep
Yeah.
and watch a movie, and for some reason it's always like, I love Good Will Hunting.
Yeah.
When I'm sad, I watch Good Will Hunting, I eat something that's not good for me, and I get a good night's sleep, and in the morning, I feel better. I mean, I can make it at that point.
Because you didn't run from it,
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
you know?
That's so true. And for years I ran from
Sure.
every uncomfortable feeling that existed. Yeah. Straight into a bottle.
Yeah, it's just like you were saying, leaning into it. You know?
Yeah.
You know, and I think for me, you know, going through the journey of you know, recovery was definitely just the beginning. I remember checking myself into Denver Cares, right? And there's the doors. I've surrendered all my stuff.
Yeah.
Here I am, no shoes on. And then you walk up to this door, and right on the other side of it is where like shit gets real, right? That's that. And I remember stopping, and I was like, okay, cool. So if you're going to back out of this, this is the time. It was a very, very, I'll never forget that moment. And I very purposefully like took that step through those doors, and, you know, like the rest is history. And that's just really not doing it justice. But yeah, I mean, that's just, you know, that's what it was like. It was very symbolic. So yeah, I think that's,
I really appreciate you saying that, because there were so many moments where I didn't want to do it anymore. I didn't want to, you know, I didn't want to go to the celebration. I didn't want to go make arrangements.
Yeah.
I didn't want to go, you know, talk to anybody. I remember vividly thinking, you could steal a car. Like, I know there are keys around here. I could just get in someone's car and like,
go.
when would they notice? I vividly, and it's those moments, right? It's those moments where, and I really like to look at them as like, you chose the hardest thing.
yes.
You just did the hardest thing, because that's the difference between running and avoiding and just like tackling and like leaning in, because we can avoid forever.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Exactly.
fucking go anywhere.
No.
Right?
No.
Versus just like doing the hardest thing and being like, I would really rather do this with as much grace and vulnerability as I can and just show up as I am. Because I think for me as a person, like, it's so valuable just to be like, here it is. Like, I'm a hot mess today. Like, you know, I cried in the car on the way here, and here I am. Like, I still did it.
Yeah.
And I think that creates a different dialogue and like a space for other people to be like, I cried on the way too. Like, what did you cry about? Like, it's
Yeah.
just a different conversation when we can just be like, yeah, like I'm struggling today. Like, today was just a hard one, you know? And to do that with people that feel safe,
Yeah.
that is what I'm advocating for through this
Right.
conversation. Like,
Oh,
just
yeah.
be safe for someone. Like, just show up for someone. Just lean into like the really uncomfortable stuff.
Yeah. And laugh about it.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, because it's so funny. And maybe that's one of the lessons that we take from recovery is you can be in a room of people in recovery with somebody telling the most awful story, and everyone will laugh, including them. And if you were looking at it from the outside, you'd be like, what are they laughing about?
Yeah.
But when you've truly experienced something together, the absurdity of it sometimes is, and you laugh and then you feel better, even in the
Yeah.
midst of the pain. you know?
Exactly.
And I think that, like you said, that comes from being in that safe space with people around you who aren't giving you platitudes, who aren't running from it. They're just there, right? I'm just here. I get it. Whatever, you know?
And I don't.
I don't
that's
get it.
okay too,
Yeah, exactly,
right?
exactly.
And that's okay too. And just show up still.
Yeah, they don't have to get it.
Right?
That's so true.
And I think it's really important to also note that like you shouldn't have to apologize or not feel like you have the right to feel however you feel explicitly.
Yeah.
Right through this process. And you might show up in front of people that like just don't get it.
Yeah.
And that's yeah. And that's okay. Like you don't have to apologize for taking space, especially for, you know, other people who are different gendered or like, you know, have been whatever, you know, put in a position that are less than.
Yeah.
Taking space feels really hard, right? We don't necessarily always feel like we have the right to. And you do.
Yeah.
You always do, right? Especially for people that feel safe.
Yeah. You have the right to exist as you are in any given moment.
Right.
And if anyone can't deal with it,
That's on them.
That's really is on them.
Yep.
That was so hard for me to learn. Mm-hmm. It's just in general in my life,
Yeah.
It's okay for me to be Aaron. I don't have to fit your mold
Exactly.
of who you think Aaron is.
Yep.
And I think when you're going through grief, because you don't want to make somebody uncomfortable.
Yes.
Especially if you're kind of a people pleaser.
Yes.
And you're the kind of person that always is trying to make people feel better. You don't want your grief to make them feel bad.
Yeah. And guess what? It's okay for that to happen.
Totally okay.
If they don't
Totally
get it,
okay.
that's okay. They may not be a part of the club yet,
Right.
or they may not just be willing to do it, or they couldn't that day or that moment, which is real too. But also just this like really quick other piece that just popped into my head, just this idea that grief, all of us today are talking about being in the club because we've experienced a loss of a person, but you can also experience the loss of an identity. You can also experience the loss of a relationship. You can also experience the loss of anything that really meant something to you. Like that's also grief. Like that's also
That is so true.
the same symptoms that we're talking about, right? Like,
Yeah, grieving is as harsh as it was. Grieving the fact that I could not run to a bottle anymore. Like that was not going to be my safe zone.
right.
And I was just talking with somebody who experienced the first symptoms of that, and I was like, "No, that's a good thing.
That's
Like,
a good thing.
The fact that you passed a place that used to bring you safety, and you realize that's no longer going to bring me safety anymore.
Yeah.
That will make you sad.
Yes.
And if it doesn't, then there may be an issue. But when it does, and you realize that, you're like, "Oh, I'm changing."
right.
And I know I've had to grieve a relationship, within the past couple of years. And like I said, it was one of those deals where you can realize, oh, I had a lot of fun there, and not be like, oh, but I have to, it's never going to be that way again.
Right.
But it was okay that I felt that way for a long time.
Right.
And just talking about it, just simply like, I love how you say that, just somebody's in your space and you're just expressing how you feel and they're just listening.
Right.
Because if it's one thing I've learned, A, I like to talk, and B,
No.
yes, I know, surprisingly enough. And B, it's good for me to talk, right? When at the appropriate time. And that a lot of therapy is, I remember one therapist telling me that, like, every time you tell this story, your brain is making new connections.
Yes.
She was like, my job is basically to sit here and let you figure stuff out, kind of giving you some helpful hints. And I was like, wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, it was interesting how I found out, that's what counseling is.
I know, right?
I just sit in silence and wait for you to figure it out.
Yeah.
I still will say it from time to time. The doctor, our doctor, he was my counselor, right? And from time to time, I'll just be like, dude, what did you really do? Because I literally just sat in there and talked, and you threw in a couple words, right? And that was the that was the bulk of our the experience.
Yeah.
Well, sorry, I was
But I
just
get it now.
Yeah, and I think there's also this really beautiful thing that can happen when we just talk about things is we're just essentially processing out loud.
Yes.
That's
Yes.
really it,
Yeah.
right? And in doing it in a space, like all I've been saying this whole time is just doing it with somebody who feels safe and just like listening to you, ideally like non-judgmentally, and just like holding it for you and just saying like, yeah, that's really hard. Like,
Yeah.
because it is. And I don't often think, we're taught to just tell somebody like, yeah, you're right. That was really crummy. I'm sorry that happened.
Right.
Yeah.
That can just be true, right? We can't fix it.
Exactly. Although I do have to say, in advocating professional therapy, the occasional, like, have you ever thought about it like this, changed my life.
Sure.
Yeah.
When somebody pointed out to me, like, did you ever think that this thing might be related to this other thing? And you're like, light bulbs go off, and and you're like, but then you process again from that point, right? They're not telling you everything. Just things will become obvious through you speaking, and then they help you connect the dots, and then you go on from there. Like learning that and I'll just a little bit about myself, learning that my relationship issues began with being adopted blew my mind. Just changed my life forever. And then from there on, I was able to like learn how I related to women and all kinds of things, right? So those kinds of things are why people are professionals. And that's why it's sometimes very useful to seek professional advice, although it can be very therapeutic just to talk to somebody. They may not have that equipment to go, but did you ever look at it like this?
Sure.
Whereas when you're talking to a professional who's trained, they'll do that for you. And it's awesome.
I feel really fortunate because a lot of my friends are my friends and have training.
Yeah, right.
Right.
So I have like the best of both worlds.
Yeah.
But they still challenge me. And I think that's important to have people who really are going to champion your growth
Yeah.
versus placate, go along with your,
I'm
your-
pointing at Adrian right now.
Sure.
Wait, when it comes to what part?
Challenging?
Yeah.
Sure.
Oh yeah,
No,
all
no.
day.
But I didn't mean to cut you off though.
No, yeah, no. I mean, that was the thing. But yeah, having people, right, like Adrian or anyone who you can have in your circle that's team truth,
Yeah.
right? But safe, right?
Exactly.
So I feel safe to say things that are really hard, but I know that you're not just saying things to make me feel okay, right? Like,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
co-signing on nonsense.
Yeah.
Yo, I like that. I think I want a
Co-signing on
t-shirt.
nonsense,
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't need you to co-sign on nonsense.
No, your t-shirt will say, Adrian's t-shirt will say, I will not co-sign your nonsense.
Yeah. Oh, all day.
Because
man.
he won't.
Yeah.
And it's so funny how so many of our clients are like they come in and it's so funny to watch this happen. So they'll come in and be like, oh, Adrian's the tough one and blah, blah, blah. And then they come back 2 years later like, thank you so much. Because anybody who gets this thing has to have somebody in their life that's like, you are not thinking correctly. Like that's not like I'm not going to tell you how to think, but I'm not co-signing that because that doesn't
Sure.
make any sense.
Yeah. I'm
Right.
So
not
go
gonna do
rethink that and come on back.
Hey man.
No, and it's
Someone's
like you
got-
said,
someone's
it's
gotta
team
do it.
truth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I
And-
like that.
And for years, I had people who just co-signed my nonsense because I played some kind of useful role in their life. So they wanted me to play that role.
Sure.
So they're going to agree with whatever I said, And no one ever pointed out to me like, yeah, you have become a raging alcoholic. You're not a nice person. You like to think of yourself as nice, but you're not anymore. You may have been at one point, and I was, but I had become this person that I didn't want to be. And if somebody hadn't really pointed those things out, and then once you get through it, it's so funny. We talked about it last time. You don't come out of 20 years addiction or 20 years of addiction or alcoholism with like good life skills.
Sure.
You just don't.
Right.
Like, removing the alcohol and getting somewhat sane, step one. But then step two is, okay, so let's relearn some things.
Living.
Yeah, let's live. And Adrian, while he didn't really play a part at all in the first, number two, huge.
Sure.
Like just small things. Like, hey, have you ever thought about this? Have you ever thought about this? And it's funny because I know myself, so I'll be like, whatever, I don't need that. Like, that's a really good idea.
Well, and I think, right, the whole point of this journey of 2teachone is to be able to be uplifting and to offer pieces of feedback or advice or hopefully a connection to something
Yes.
and to teach, right? And so as silly as it sounds, as minuscule as it sounds, it actually works, right? Like if you try something and it doesn't work, cool, try something else.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
something out there that will work for you, whether it's through grief and loss, whether it's through relationships, whether it's through therapy, whether it's through addiction, whatever it is. Just keep trying because
Yes.
you're worth it.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Yeah, that's
Right?
awesome. Yeah, good words.
So, I'm just looking over the notes, right? And there's a couple of things that I thought were really important. We're already at like an hour and a half at this point, but are you okay? Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So I just wanted to bring this up. So I touched on it just briefly, and we talked about this whole idea of, long distance loss versus in-home loss. I have experienced both, but really as an adult, so when I was 13, I came home, from vacation and my brother was gone, and I was young enough to where, I just went through it the best way I knew at that point, right? plus, there's this whole, adult children of alcoholics thing. I was forced to grow up too fast.
Sure.
And in my mind, my role was to be the man of the house.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I think that definitely, played into things, right? But now I've gone through this loss from a distance, and it's rough. It's just weird. I don't even know. I don't know what it is. You keep asking me, like, how you doing? How you feeling? And I think most of the time I say, I don't know. I don't have anything to measure it by. You know what I'm saying? Like, so how am I supposed to know where I'm at? Like I said, I had the advantage in some ways of being able to somewhat prepare, for the loss of my grandfather. And I don't know, I guess in some moments I feel like, guilty. Like, am I not grieving? You know what I'm saying? Like, why, how come I can't tell where I'm at? I obviously have these moments where I miss, my grandfather. And more than anything else, because I'm doing this now, I started a podcast. Really, it's a health and wellness brand that I'm trying to build, to really reach people, because this is something we all need.
Yeah.
I need him to advise me, that's who he was, he was, the most stable. He was the foundation. He was there's so many people that love and support me, right? But to me, he was like the surest thing. And so I don't have that. And I think in many ways that's been the hardest thing I've had to deal with.
Sure.
Not having that.
Well, and I wonder, I don't know, if there's a theme in every single person's loss that resonates, because I hear that so clearly. And for me, the thing that I go back to consistently is the person that looked just like me. The only person who looked like me, talked like me, act like me isn't here. And I feel this burden or weight of almost, and I wonder if you can relate to this, of like, I have to carry it for both of us now. Like, I have to live for both. And I don't look at it as a negative. I look at it as empowering and like, let me do right by you. Like, let me do these things despite this loss, and in feeling empowered by it. But it can also feel really heavy and, overwhelming at times too, and lonely, I think is the thing that comes up for me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think it goes back to what you said earlier, Allison, which is there is no right way to grieve.
Right.
And I almost think that the continual self-introspection is sort of the key, right? And so you're always knowing what you're doing, and keep asking yourself, right? What am I going through, instead of just existing without that introspection? Does that make sense?
No, it totally does. And well, the other thing is, I think everything happens in its time, because if it wasn't now, if I wasn't in the person I am today, having experienced some similar, things, then I don't know if I'd be able to handle it, because I do, do this self-searching, this inventory.
Yeah.
I practice awareness. Okay. I'm like hyper vigilant about, those kinds of things. I'm always like, okay, I ask myself, but I don't just stop there. I'll ask someone else, someone, in the sad club, or someone who's in my circle. I'll ask them, I'm like, so this is what I'm experiencing, thinking, feeling, or, am I losing it, or is this valid? And it's good. It's okay to, do that kind of thing, because you don't always know.
Yeah. And I think too, what you were saying is I experienced that too. Like, now I'm able to be like, I'll be at a place, because my mom, her favorite photo or favorite trip she ever took was to Colorado. And I think she would be so excited that I lived in Colorado and that I haven't had a drink in a long time.
Yeah.
And I think it doesn't I feel like that. Like, I'm living it. I'm like, yeah, you should be here. And in some measure, in my belief system, some part of her is, right? And so, yeah, like, you're experiencing these things, and it becomes not, I'm so sad that I missed you, but like I said, it's empowering. Like, this is what you would have wanted. You would have totally enjoyed this. And here I am enjoying it for both of us.
Yes. And I do think what you touched on with the long distance piece is really different and really complex. And
That's
I think
true.
a very different relationship for, I think, everybody. But I mean, for me too, I'm also experiencing it long distance.
Right.
And I think there's this weird sense of both, this weird sense of gratitude that I'm not facing it every single day. I'm not in the house. I'm not in the, dynamic. I'm not in the day to day.
Right.
And this weird sense of, I feel guilty that I'm not. I'm both grateful and guilty that that it isn't in my face, that I'm not doing the things that, it sounds like he was a pillar in the community and, being a part of that or seeing family every single day. I look at it as both. Some days I feel a lot more grateful that I have space and distance and I'm not just sitting in it. And then other days I feel so guilty and so sad that I'm not there and that I'm not doing the things that I should be doing.
Sure.
And I think that's a huge piece too. And I think people who are caretakers at the end, that whole experience, right, is very different. And then picking up it's so individual and it's so different.
Right.
And I really feel you on the distance. Like I just do. I mean, I think I understand to whatever I can relate on.
Right.
Those pieces.
That's interesting.
Yeah. It's very, man, I think, it's interesting because I feel like I can see like myself, maybe a year from now looking back and when things are more clear, right? And just being able to actually look at it in from a different, a little bit of different lens, right? And it's always like that for me. I always tell people, I think that I have a certain amount of intellect and this and that, but the way I feel and take things in, I think I consider things in a very interesting way. And so it takes longer for me to do so. Like
I could see that.
It takes so much, it takes a little bit of time, but then once I grasp it, I've done it in a way where I can definitely give it to someone else. You know what I'm saying? I can be like, I'll be your Sherpa. Not maybe, obviously, everyone's circumstances are different and stuff, but I totally understand, and I know something about that. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think if I were describing you, I think that's your archetype. Like your basic foundational. Because I always think it's funny. Our Adrian and I's dynamic is, I'm literally like 10 years older than him, but in many ways, I'm like 20 years younger. And I think you were probably born that way. I think that, once you're healthy and, just who you were meant to be, that Sherpa instinct that you have is very strong. And I think you don't get carried away, at least from what I see, with like emotion. So it makes sense to me that this would filter more slowly and that you wouldn't have an outsized un-Adrian like response to it. It would sort of filter in and you would deal with it as it does. And then it would begin to show up in what you could teach or guide other people. I could totally see that.
Yeah, I was told when I was younger. I've always had friends that are older than me.
Mm-hmm.
And so, my uncle used to be like, dude, you're just way beyond your years,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't know. I think, people make these observations. I'm just glad to help, I just, yeah.
Well, and I appreciate you naming the year, right? When you were like a year from now.
Yeah.
Looking back. And I think that that's a helpful thing to point out too, because it's a year from now, maybe setting a date for yourself, but even like I think of the year of the loss or like these anniversaries
Yes,
that
I
are
wanted to talk
also
about that,
landmines that are, how do you do it? Like what is a good way to do it? I think everyone does it differently.
Yeah.
And so for me, like I had my brother's birthday was really close to after having like lost him. And it was really important for me to have a party. He was going to turn 30.
Okay.
And so I did. Like we did.
Yeah.
So my family and I we threw him a birthday party because we were going to do it anyways. And, you know, that was how I really wanted to celebrate him, because he would have just been dancing a fool and just like having fun. And like, that is what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to talk about, because I think anniversaries are challenging, like
absolutely.
I found
holidays, you know?
like some kind of ritual.
Sure.
Like I don't do it anymore, but for the first 5 or 6 years, and now I'm out of state, but the day, it was such a weird time. So she passed away. My birthday was 3 days later. And just through the tradition and what we did, that my birthday was the day of her funeral, right? And so December 1st of every year, I would celebrate. I would put on some very nice clothes and get some flowers and drive to the grave and pay my respects. And like, that's what I did, you know? And then over time, that ritual became less important for me, because I realized, I don't know, I had some realizations in my own life. And, but I think at the beginning, some kind of ritual, maybe based on whatever, religious or philosophical or spiritual system that you feel most comfortable in, can guide people through those landmines of the anniversaries. It certainly did for me. Like, I developed my own little ritual of what I did that day.
Right.
And by doing that, it got me out of any outsized emotional reaction that I would have.
Yeah, I think in many ways for me, you know, what we're doing right now and, you know, all the things I have, you know, planned, you know, that's really how I'm going to, you know, honor and remember. It's always going to be, you know, it's a continual anniversary, you know, a celebration of, you know, just the gratefulness, you know, that I have, you know, how thankful I am that I had this person that, you know, gave me everything that they were, the bad, the good, you know, all those things. And, you know, in many ways, that's, you know, why I am who I am today.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's why, and Megan Devine talks about it in her book too, that's why this is so hard, is because we're experiencing the opposite of love, right? We're experiencing all of the love that we have for these people, and that's why this is so hard, right? If this was a less intimate, I don't know. I don't even want to identify the opposite end of it.
Sure.
But just speaking to like the amount of gratitude that we have, the amount of love that we have for these people, that's why this is so consuming. That's why this is so challenging. That's why we will never be the same, right? Pre and post. Like, it's just a different thing, right? But it's because of that. That the depth of our love. And I just really want to quote, because Brene Brown has a Netflix special out called A Courage, and she really talks about vulnerability in there, and she talks about grief and loss. And this is the quote that really stood out to me through that. But the quote says, "When you are grateful for what you have, I understand, you understand the magnitude of what I've lost." And that just speaks so much to that I understand, you understand, right?
Yeah.
That's that like safety and vulnerability piece. Like, you understand the depth of this because you've experienced so much love.
Yeah.
If you can get that, then you can imagine
Sure. That's
the
true.
depth of this loss.
Yeah.
So it really stood out to me.
That's interesting. It's a good quote.
I like that. Yeah, when I read it, I was like, I get that. I totally get that. Yeah, she's great. I'm gonna watch that sometime soon. I've been, like I said, I hoard my Netflix shows. All the stuff that's good, I like put it on a list, and I'm like, let me just get rid of all this other stuff, and then I'll get to that. But that's a beautiful quote, and I think it aptly, you know, describes, you know, what I was just, you know,
Exactly.
you know, because I'm that guy, like during Mother's Day, that my post is every day is Mother's Day. But
Right.
since we're doing it,
Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, that was a hard day for many years.
Oh,
Yeah.
for sure.
Yeah.
I did not like Mother's Day.
Absolutely.
And even now, I just kind of ignore it. Like, it's like, Cool. Mother's Day.
Well, and I think of that's like those anniversaries. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
those
exactly.
ways to cope. Like, yeah, so it's you ignore it, you know, like I'm very conscientious now. I think through this huge like blow up or explosion, right, in my life of, oh, these are hard. These are not just like really fun. These are also the total opposite side of in the complexity that is love, right? That as much as I'm loving and experiencing this, someone else could have really be experiencing the opposite
Yes.
through this process. And so it's really changed my cognizance as well.
Yeah. And I find it interesting that I choose now. It's not that I ignore it, but like I recognize it. And then I choose to sort of not make that an anniversary or I don't allow myself, like, I feel sad anytime, like the memories come and occasionally I feel sad, but I'm not going to make it a point like, oh, it's Mother's Day and so I have to be sad.
Sure.
Like I don't do that anymore. But I was definitely the first 4 or 5, it was difficult because it's a big day, right?
Yeah.
You know, it's a day that we celebrate our moms and who doesn't love their mom? So, but now not allowing myself an excuse to like, to have a pity party, right? Cause that's what I've learned too is while it's okay to feel what I'm feeling, I can also, especially as an addict, let's everybody feel sorry for me. And I want some attention and I want to have a reason why I can feel sad.
Yeah.
Cause it's dangerous for me to exist in a space where I am too emotionally disturbed, right?
Sure.
Because if, we're talking about addiction more than grief now, but if I get into that fight or flight thing too long, my brain will make a decision that I don't want it to make.
Well, we can self-sabotage
Yeah.
in seconds, right?
Right,
We can
yeah.
get any reason to destroy ourselves.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
I just won't do it.
Yeah, and that's that dance. That's the dance of like, yeah, it's totally fair for you to feel that way, but like maybe not feel like that every single day, all day,
Yeah.
where you're not capable of, just getting out of bed. Like that's significant.
Yeah.
And
I did experience those times and I don't know. It's just different now through time and distance and the grief process where we're at the beginning, the pull yourself up by your own bootstraps isn't really good advice. At a certain point in time, it can become some good advice where once you realize like, okay, now I've turned a corner. Now I can kind of get myself out of bed. Mm-hmm. And if I choose to stay in bed, that's a choice. I'm no longer suffering from something that's beyond my control, which if you're experiencing grief, especially at the early stages, it may be beyond your control.
absolutely.
I mean, it certainly was for me for a while.
Absolutely.
Man, I can't tell you how much I'm loving this discussion.
It's such a meaty and weighty topic. We've dove into the second hour, and I think this may end up being a 2-part episode.
It could. I mean, yeah. I mean, at this point we're about to be at 2 hours in.
Yeah. Which is great.
7
we've talked
minutes.
about some really good stuff.
No, we have. I mean, I was just sitting here looking at, the people in the room and feeling very grateful that, that we can do this.
Yeah.
It's a big deal, and then I was also thinking it's amazing because had I not decided to just, for us to just start doing the podcast, right? And you were a big part of this because you've been through the, journey, we were driving back and forth from freaking Colorado Springs, doing all these, like, there's been a lot leading up to, this, right?
Yeah.
And had I not decided to do this, or for us to do this, it would have been like this wouldn't be happening.
I know. I totally get that, and that's why. Just real quick, and then I'll be quiet again because I could take over a conversation pretty easily. We know that, but I think about so if my mom doesn't pass away, and all the things don't occur after that, and I don't come to Colorado, then I don't end up where I end up. I don't meet you. None of this happens if that thing that I wish hadn't happened happens, right? Mm-hmm. And so you look back and you're able to say,
totally.
Yeah.
Same situation. One of the reasons why we even started doing the podcast was because of what ended up happening.
Yeah.
with my grandfather, right? Like this was never in the plan. And it's so interesting because ever since I started my journey, into sobriety, nothing has been the plan. It's like the universe has been like, I have my plans to do X, Y, Z. And I'm just thinking, oh yeah, this is it. You know what I'm saying? I got this. Life is going to be so grand, right? And then the universe is like, cool story, bro.
Yeah, now I'm going to need you to go over here and do this. Yeah.
I think it's that. I absolutely think there can be triumph through heartbreak or because of heartbreak.
Yeah.
And I also think like you make choices and you guys are making choices to do things that are helpful and empowering and educational. You could have made a different choice. You could have, not taken the trips to Colorado Springs. You could have, at any point been like, you know what? No, I'm not going to do this anymore. But like that perseverance and the resilience is so necessary to just get to where you want to get to.
Yeah.
Right. And like that's the things that, and anything like grief and loss, any accomplishment, anything you're doing, if you just stay committed to it, if you just try and you're making positive choices for yourself, like that's really it, right? Like it's just a choice a day. It's all of these choices every single day. Because every single day, like we could have woken up today and been like, I'm not going to do this. Like, I don't want to talk about something so tender. I don't want to, put this out there and be vulnerable, and you stepping out and doing something like creating something really magical. Like that's the good stuff. Like that's the stuff to highlight.
Agreed. Yeah. It's like running a marathon, right? Because you get to mile 3 and you're like, you know what? I could just stop. Like, I could just tell them I finished the marathon. Nobody even's going to know. Especially
I could have picked my packet up and been like, got my packet. I'm good. I got my shirt.
Right? And you just show up at the end of the marathon, you got to sneak in, get your medal. They're not, there's not like the police out there going, you did
the marathon police.
Somebody drove you here.
No. And it's even when we're not running on your own, right?
Yeah.
And people like, oh, you did so many miles. I'm like, yeah, but I wanted to stop at mile 5 and mile 7. And then you just realize, I'm just going to, like you said, it's not this, in the moment, it's not this grand decision. It's simply a decision to make another healthy decision, right?
Well, and what I think of every single run is don't trust the first mile, right? Don't trust it, right? Because if it feels great, strap in because this is going to be a long one, right? Or if it's really hard, persevere and get through it and get to the second one because it could look really different and you could catch your stride. And like that's really it, right? Like you don't trust the beginnings or don't trust the how it feels initially, but like just keep going. You got this. Like I literally texted Adrian and was just like, "We got this. Like let's just do it. Let's talk about the hard stuff and just talk about it and make it real."
That's so awesome.
Yeah.
And that's like the journey of life. And if you were to sum it up, just put one foot in front of the other.
Exactly.
And make the best decision that you can make. Give yourself grace when you fall down.
Yep.
And allow yourself to be who you are. And don't be ashamed of it.
Right.
Well said.
Thank you.
So after everything we've said, right? So I'm reading this here and it says, giving yourself explicit permission to talk about it as openly as you need to and not feeling negatively about it, right? So I think after everything we've said, I think that's a good place to like kind of close it, right? Because we're hoping, because we've done this, right, that it, that we get through to someone, when they need it most.
Yes.
And, perhaps it, inspires them to at a different point, be able to, hold space for someone else and, get them to a place where they can, talk, if that's what they want to do, to share their experience.
Well, and I got that. I met up with somebody who is also an honorary
member.
She's a member of the SAD Club too.
Yeah.
And I had sat down with her and I had said, hey, this is what I'm going to do. I have this really beautiful opportunity. I'm scared shitless, but like, I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
What do you want to talk about? What do you want to contribute? And that was exactly her line. And she had said that. And for her, it was really important to be heard and that just talk about it explicitly. You do not have to, hold back. And if you need to talk about it, then do it, and it's okay to take space. And it doesn't matter that someone else is uncomfortable because you're uncomfortable or sad, right? Like that's a really natural response. And that's okay.
Yeah. It's so true. It's okay for them to be uncomfortable. It's okay for you to be uncomfortable. Sitting in uncomfortability is life sometimes.
Absolutely.
Literally every single day.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And if you never get outside your comfort zone, you're never going to accomplish anything. I found that out too.
For sure. Well, and I say this all the time, particularly like in my practice and in work, but like discomfort is where the growth lives.
Yes.
If you're uncomfortable, then something's different.
Yeah,
and it's new.
Yeah.
And what you were doing probably wasn't working, right? So like just try this, like lean into it. Lean into the discomfort and see what happens.
Yeah, and also, like, when you strike out, when you lean into it and you take a swing and you strike out, just be like, okay, I'll get the next one.
It's still information.
Yeah, exactly.
You still swung.
Exactly.
It's much better than not swinging.
It is, because we could have read countless articles on how to do podcasts and this and that and what.
Yep.
There's no way we would have learned half the things that we have, up until this point.
At a certain point, you just go.
You just go.
Yeah.
And
then you don't stop getting better, though. That's true, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's been an amazing journey.
Yeah, it's been an amazing journey. I'm so glad we got together to talk about this.
Oh, yeah.
Is there anything you'd like to add, before we close?
I just want to say thank you to both of you for allowing, I think, the breadth of the conversation to happen and like the depth of it, because I think oftentimes it's really comfortable just to be superficial and just, like that's really tough. Good luck with that. Like versus really like sinking your teeth in and being transparent, because, identifying as being a member of the club is significant. Talking about it is really hard. And I think, thank you for creating the space to be able to talk about it. And I hope that, one person hears it and just it resonates, or like they understand and they can get it.
Yeah.
Cause that's what the point is, right? Is to
Yes, it is.
one person
Right.
teach one person.
Just one.
Yeah, exactly. So I really appreciate both of you. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate that.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Oh,
For someone that I hold in such high regard as you to agree to come and speak, it said a lot, about it was a little bit validating, that, what we're doing is important, for Allison to be like, no, see, that's the thing. Like, that's how I think about you.
That's very kind.
It is. It's absolutely true.
For you to be like, it's worth doing this.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. And thanks for, contributing. Aaron, thank you for being here. We're going to keep doing this.
Oh, yeah. Well, and thank you for being the main motivating force, be like, we're going. I booked the time. I remember that, and we're going. And I'm like, oh, so it's real. Because so much of my life has been, we ought to do that. And then never doing it, so that it's awesome to be a part of this. I love it. Yeah. And Allison, like I said, you're the archetypal counselor in my head. So therapist. So it's awesome I always enjoy speaking with you, because as a professional, you are just spot on, right? And then you're also just like a really cool person. So
thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
You're super real, and I appreciate you very, very, very much. So, that said, we hope that, we help someone out there, or 1,000, whatever that looks like. Yeah. If you'd like to, make a comment, or you'd like to reach us, we'd really like to hear what you have to say about this topic, or if you have something you want to suggest, whatever it may be, feel free to reach out to us. You can email us on our website and that is www.2teachone.com. And, that's the numeral 2teach1.com. And, Facebook and Instagram, you can find us at TWOTEACHONE.
Yeah, please get a hold of us.
Absolutely. And so with that,
I will say goodbye.
It's goodbye from me also.
See ya.
Hope to see you again, Allison. Alrighty, we're out.